Well, welcome Australian Veteran News viewers. It's my great pleasure this morning to welcome Shaun Leane, the Victorian Minister for Veterans. Minister Leane is an Oakley lad whose father fought in New Guinea campaign during World War II, so he's more than just a little bit familiar with the veteran community. He was first elected to Victorian Parliament in 2006, the Minister for Local Government. He's also the Minister for Suburban Development and, most importantly for us, the Minister for Veterans. Shaun, you've been advocating recently about Victoria as a destination for veterans and their families.
Yeah, and from the outset, Mark, thanks a lot for having a chat with me. I've watched a few of your programs. I think it's actually quite a good learning experience to watch some of your interviews for me too. And it's actually, it's absolutely a privilege to be the Minister for Veterans in the Victorian Government. And you mentioned my dad was served in New Guinea, and sort of sad thing where I was quite young when he passed away, when he came back and had a heap of kids and then passed away. But I've learnt more about his time in the service in the last few months than I had, before. And it's kind of, I don't know if the older kids were sort of maybe shouldering us about stories, that he used to wake up and run down the corridors at home and wake them all up because he thought there was, danger and things like that, and you think, and you hear about stories out now of contemporary vets, and yeah, it's been a real learning experience. And I suppose, Mark, to answer your question, one of the things that I've always thought about, last term of government, I was the Parliamentary Secretary to the Infrastructure Program.
Right.
And which is a great job. And part of the job was to encourage that there be a number of people on our priority job list, Victorian priority job list, employed on the infrastructure program, given that there was billions of dollars.
Yeah.
State money, state taxpayers' money, and great opportunities for employment. So I got to speak to a number of vets, and vets and their family we included on the priority job list last term, which is obviously a really good thing that we did. But I got to speak to a lot of vets that were working on the construction were, stories around that in the services, you might, like I suppose some low-lying fruit that, you might learn to put an intravenous drip into one of your comrades, in a trench, but you don't necessarily, when you leave, leave or with a certificate 2 or 3 in first aid.
Yeah.
And I sort of thought, I always thought about that, and I thought, and a lot of men and women that were in the services, using heavy equipment, driving trucks, things like that, and not necessarily all of them are coming out with heavy vehicle licenses that can equate to the public and private sector. So in the view, I always had that view before I became the Vets Minister. And then I kind of delved into it a bit deeper, obviously, once I took up this role. And I was talking to a few of the transition officers in the services, where one thing that sort of really blew me away was, there was one gentleman that was in the forces for a long time, and he ended up being a lead person in a water establishment group.
Yeah.
So what is? It's sort of like, we don't know. I don't know, the private sector and the public sector. We don't know what that is. And so this guy was a bit frustrated because he was unemployed, but he was an expert about everything about water. And so I thought that's like an example where the public and private sector don't really know what types of, if I can call them occupations or disciplines, that men and women actually perform in the services. And then how do you equate that to, it might be, it's interesting, this gentleman, his title was Warrant Officer Class 2 or something like that. And that doesn't mean anything to Yarra Valley Water when they're recruiting.
Yeah.
But so I spoke to the CEO of Yarra Valley Water, and we had this discussion, and he was actually surprised too. He said, "Look, it's surprised he didn't know of these men and women and experts in the defence forces, because if now they know they can actively seek out if there are people leaving the forces like that. And then, so led me to work in establishing what I call the Victorian Veterans Employment and Skills Accreditation Roundtable.
Yeah.
So I've made up an acronym that because it's important you do that, Mark. In government, you've got to do that.
Yeah, I'm sure you've got a KPI.
So VSAR, and it's got people from obviously the vets family, vets community, people, some great high level people from legacy and other areas, and then people from skills, as in Wodonga TAFE and other universities, personnel sitting in direct, and also high level people from employment associations.
Yeah.
And in the new year, I want to actually increase that part of the group. And I just tasked them to, obviously the people that are experts in the defence forces, can you kind of identify all these different skills? And speaking to, I think it was David McLaughlin, who told me that you can, in the forces, you can go and build a city in 60 days with the personnel you've got. Yeah. So it's not just about building, it's about, like everything that goes with it. And so I was kind of hoping that this group can identify all of those skills, occupations, disciplines, transfer them to what they actually call them in the public and private sector.
Yeah, right. And it's a big translation exercise, isn't it? The ranking system. And I think this is where one of the things can go wrong, Shaun, is that they try to equate what a warrant officer is with some APS, designation, and it's never quite the same. The levels of responsibility are different, and their backgrounds and experience are different. There's not a direct translation, and it becomes a bit of a quagmire. You've got to be careful you don't sort of over categorize and put people into boxes too quickly as well.
Yeah, and I'm really keen just to keep it simple. I'm really keen to just simplify it, and that's why it's good to have people from both sides of the fence in skills and in defence. I heard, I'm catching up with Wodonga TAFE, who I didn't meet before they entered the round table, but I understand that they've done a lot of work in this already. So I'm really keen to talk to them and see, if there's people, if there's groups out there, universities or whoever, done a lot of work already, then I'm really keen to capture that. And I think, and the last element is, only if those ex-servicemen and women might need some extra training, so it's another competency, another, and what is it? And this is where the skills people are helping us. What is it? And, it might be just one part of a course.
Sure.
It's just one part. And I'm a big one in not training people for the sake of it. And I felt like in my role as the parliamentary secretary I spoke to before, is the different people on our job priority list, I'd speak to different, groups, associations, different skills centres. And I kind of want to do a 6-week job ready thing where those people weren't getting paid. They're just, you turn up and you do this 6-week job ready thing. And then you step onto the project. And my argument was, and I'm an electrician by trade. My argument was, I know exactly how that industry works. Is someone walks up to the foreman and says, look, my son's looking for a job. Is there anything going here? The next week they start on the job. They go and buy themselves some boots, and then they start on the job and they learn on the job. There's no 6 weeks of, so I kind of been really forceful. Let's not just train for the sake of it. Let's just identify if there is some minimum competencies that need to be.
I'd put it to you too that the skills and the training transferability and the translations and all that are very important aspects. And as you rightly pointed out, there's a lot of efforts in the past have gone to do that work, and all sorts of people will offer to help people with prior recognition of learning and things like that along the way. But I think it's the personal attributes that need to be promoted. I think back in not only into industry, but also into state government, there's a great opportunity because, you know, I've argued, and we've had a conversation before, that these people have already been government employees. They've already been through a very stringent and extremely challenging set of tests and psychological assessments and training and all that kind of thing. So they've kind of, in my mind, they've already proven themselves in some respect in terms of their personal attributes. So it's just the skills piece, which is the part of the puzzle you're talking about now, to put that in place so they can sort of step into something more, you know, more easily, I suppose.
Oh, absolutely. And there's already been and I think it's quite a successful program in the state government where, Major General McLaughlin sort of has led it, where I think there's been over 600 ex-servicemen and women employed in the public sector in Victoria.
Yeah.
I think, and I think we can easily get to 1,000. That should be the aspiration for next year.
Is those numbers because you've just collected the data and you're ticking them off that they've joined, or is it because they've been helped in there and there's been assistance in the process?
I think there's a bit of both. It's a program that proactively puts a shingle out and says the public sector are really keen to pick up ex-servicemen and women's skills. And I think this is probably the answer, a long-winded answer to answering your first question, Mark.
Yeah.
And I don't think we're there yet. I think we've got to do a lot more work before we can say that we'll be the destination state for ex-service men and women. But I suppose that's what we want to be because we want them. You've set the target, which is fantastic, and I know some of the other states are doing some similar kinds of programs, not all approaching it the same way. I understand there's some mentoring programs in different places and things like that, and they sound actually quite good. The ones that worry me are the ones that are quite the bureaucratic ones. To look up your rank and your trade on a table and translate that to a government job. I don't think that's probably the best way to do it, but I think it's far more nuanced and more complicated than that, obviously. Absolutely. And so what my aspiration, and it was great that the employer association high level people were on the table.
Yeah.
My aspiration is that that the private sector, if we can help them get their head around that these people are going to be available, well, as you said, the attributes they've got already, but also the skills. And our state needs them. We're coming out of it. We want them. We're coming out of a COVID recovery, a huge budget that we need to equip all of those programs, all of that infrastructure. And I suppose getting back to what I was originally saying, Mark, there's people like I don't know. We don't know as a government completely. Private sector don't know that there's actual people that've got all this expertise. When you look at telecommunication, coming out of a COVID, the experts in health, and well-being, that, and we want to get to a point where we want to acknowledge their great skills. If we can assist them, if they need some sort of accreditation to work in the private or public sector, assist them to do that. Yeah. And then, the Premier's aspiration is that they'll be guaranteed employment somewhere. Yeah. If they choose to come to Victoria after leaving.
Fantastic. That's a great aspiration, and I'm guessing part of this is actually, helping market those skills and attributes to the private sector, which I think will be probably the most important thing you could do, because it's not just about saying, well, yes, there will be government job vacancies and those sorts of things there, but the private sector will have much more on offer, and they just need to understand it. And if the government can help do that, that would be terrific. Yeah.
Oh, I think absolutely. Yeah. Like I said, I didn't sit right through the roundtable because I feel that I'm going to, as a minister, I just need to let them do their work rather than me hovering over them.
Right.
But the report back I got from the chair is Joe Maloney from Legacy, is that the employment associations that were on the round table were very, very interested, to their credit, very interested. And I think it's just a matter of, and actually...
They need a channel, don't they, to try and they know about it. They hear about these great people and their great skills, but they don't know how to get them. And the
Yeah.
traditional ways of marketing for jobs or looking for jobs don't necessarily support the connection between the employer and the veteran who wants to move into the private sector or the public sector.
And I think part of the issue is that, you know, before I held this role, I was doing a bit of work with vets in the construction industry, but I didn't know the statistics that, you know, after 12 months, the 500 odd ex-servicemen and women that come to Victoria find themselves unemployed. And I think that needs part of the education piece we need to do across the private sector is that they've got these, like, their assets. We've got these assets and they're sitting at home and they want to work.
We don't really know a lot about it. I mean, I've done a little bit of research in this area, Shaun. I don't know if I mentioned this to you last time we spoke, but one of the things that I've seen a little emerging pattern is that this happens quite a lot, and they really struggle to find the opportunity, and most of them get a job through a friend or a mate of a mate sort of thing. So those conduits are really, really important, and it's normally through an employer. Well, from my experience and from what I've heard from people, is it's through an employer who's already got ex-ADF people in there already, or ADF families in there, and they just know what they're going to get, and they're not too fussed about the skill set. They just know that those people will come in and they'll come good, you know.
and the thing is that, you know, when I was working with some of the ex-servicemen and women in the construction industry, like, the mantra was, we're not looking for a favour. We just want to go. Just give us a go. You know, and then you know, they'll prove themselves. And getting back to that analogy I said before, you know, that the foreman, you know, someone comes up to the foreman and says, oh, look, my son or brother, daughter's looking for a job. That, like, they might get a job. They'll either work out or they won't. And vets aren't asking for anything more than that. They'd like to prove themselves.
Yeah.
And, you know, 8% is not good enough. Like, I know you know, look, I don't want to say cohort, but, you know, everyone that's got a different type of background group will have a couple of percent where it's tough. Sure. It's just tough, and you know, but 8% to me is crazy. So, you know, I think my goal is to simplify it so everyone can understand it. And I think that's why I've tasked this group to, you know, can explain it to everyone in an easy fashion, explain that there's all these different skill sets. It's just amazing. So I think, look, I think we're on the right track. We've got a lot of work to do. I mean, as I said, I might be looking at it too simply, but I'm trying to keep it simple.
But it sounds like a great start and a fabulous aspiration that you've set there, and then obviously that can grow and develop from here on in. You touched on it that you know, we need these skills, we need these people. How does this program fit into the broader priorities of government at the moment in Victoria?
Yeah, well, I think since coming to this role, you know, I've presented to the cabinet, and I think we have done a lot of work, and as every other jurisdiction does, around assisting in the ceremony roles and also there's some really important work. Keeping, you know, making sure that different shrines and so forth around the state are looked after and not in disrepair, and avenues of honour, and that's really important work we do. But I'm sort of keen on that if we can do more in a number of areas, as in employment, which, as you know,
it's a big one.
Having a crack at it. Housing, I think, unfortunately, I had a pretty good relationship with some of the housing charities like the Salvos and that, where you know, a good mate of mine, Brendan Noddle, who's leads Burke Street Salvos. His anecdotally says that he'll come across men and women that are definitely ex-service men and women that he finds them out of a home. They won't identify themselves unless he really, you know, sits and has a long conversation.
Yeah.
So I think we're in a good space, given that the Premier and the Housing Minister announced that we're going to spend $5.4 billion on public and social housing. I've spoken to the Richard Wynne, the Housing Minister. There's a new group called Homes Victoria that will answer to Richard Wynne. I've spoken to Homes Victoria, and they're going to speak to different groups that do assist in housing for veterans, such as Basic Care, Carry On.
Yeah.
Talk to the RSL if there's any opportunities that they're looking at. And I think we're going to be in a much better space.
Yeah. So it was quite concerning, though. I mean, I don't know if you want to be drawn into this, but it was quite concerning when there was a big there was a campaign to save Basic Care from being sold off by the RSL earlier this year, and it was Australian Veteran News wrote about it quite a bit, and a lot of people were very concerned. And state governments investing in social housing and this sort of thing, and you sort of think that we really need to make sure that those links between government and ex-service organisations enjoy some funding from state government and so forth. There should be some ties into what they're delivering, I guess, as part of that.
Yeah. And I actually rang up Michael from Basic Care after I spoke to Richard Wynne. And I had a great conversation with Basic Care probably a month ago, maybe a bit longer. This is before the announcement.
Yeah.
And Basic Care are really keen. They've got great aspirations to increase their services.
Yeah.
And they want to get into more sort of shorter term crisis accommodation. They want to get into the regions a bit more.
Yeah. I mean, they obviously need to broaden their footprint, I suppose, but I don't know. I don't know if you had a chance to ever go out to any one of their centres, but I've been out to the one in Cheltenham as a guest or barbecue that they put on at sort of the end of the year, end of COVID situation. You could just see the impact that it's had, and a really positive impact. And it's not just accommodation. They have built a very, very substantial and serious community of support for each other, and of people of quite a significant difference in age and backgrounds and all sorts of things, and I was really quite impressed with how the residents actually organised themselves, and I guess you can see the support that actually just comes from having them having that home, and I guess the stability of the relationships of the people who live around them. I think that's really important to them.
Yeah. So, and I think there's a good accommodation centre in Richmond as well. And, and look, I just see great opportunities with this housing program. And so I met with Homes Victoria in person. It's obviously kind of a new break off of the department, because it's a big job to deliver this aspiration. And obviously they're more than happy. They really want to seek out these groups that do housing with veterans, and see how can they partner with them. What can we do? And I just think there's a great opportunity, and I'm really looking forward to. Obviously, I'll keep my finger on the pulse and keep pushing to making sure that veterans are included in this big. This big investment.
So it's terrific that we've got a minister who's very engaged and interested in what's going on in local issues, Shaun, and I'm very pleased about that, and I'm sure many others are as well, because I think you're known amongst the veteran community, and I know that you're in touch with people, you're on the ground, you're listening to people, hear what's going on. One of the things that I wanted to raise with you, because I've written about it myself, one of my articles critique federal government. So, my article was about, well, there's no votes in looking after veterans, and that's why we don't, we've got some major problems. The whole issues with the Royal Commission, engagement just from government and ministers, it's just so scant, and it's just all, happy messaging and all this sort of stuff, and avoiding the difficult conversations. So, why? I guess two things. How do you reconcile there's some of these things that you're dealing with ought to be federal responsibilities, I would suggest. Why do you think it's important for Victoria to pick up on this if the federal government's not doing it?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I think you could probably expand that to why has ex-service organisations, why is there so much onus on them to supply so much?
Yeah, indeed.
I had a question in Parliament about, one of the ESOs and what they should be doing and what should not be doing with, the way they go about things. I said, well, the only responsibility for welfare is the federal government. And I've reached out to the minister, federal minister, in a letter around, like, and I'm not being political. I'm in a state Labor, government.
Mm-hmm.
There's a coalition federal government, but it's like the system, the welfare system, federal welfare system, has been really ordinary for 100 years. Doesn't matter what flavour of government over the last 100 years plus.
Yeah.
You look at some of the research my buddy that helps me, my advisors, kind of keeps throwing me up these articles, and like 100 years ago there was a hearing, a committee, a federal committee looked into the welfare system of vets, and it's got lines like, if a digger needs support, we should just give the digger support.
Mm.
So it's been like this for a long time.
Yeah.
And you touched on the Royal Commission, or insisting on a Royal Commission, and the enabling bill that I think the federal government pulled to do something different.
Mm.
I think, me personally, I think that was a great thing. I think, me personally, and I don't care if it comes my way or my government's way, I think it's time. It's 100 years too late that vets started to flex their muscles.
Yeah.
And Mark, you said there might be no votes in it. I think part of the big problem, as far as welfare for vets, is the general public do not understand that it's pretty ordinary.
Yeah. Yeah.
I kind of don't understand. Like, as you know, I'm not a vet. And I'll never pretend to be a vet. You guys are the experts, and that's why it's great to have conversations like this, and I'm learning every day.
Mm.
But I don't know if it's kind of a discipline thing that you don't sort of get yourself organised and actually beat the drum, or what it is. But I met a young woman who, her husband, and you probably know this story, but her husband, unfortunately, after serving overseas, he died, I think, a couple of months of returning in a brain tumour. Their first and only daughter was born a couple of months after that. She told me it's like her soul's been pulled out by the system for 3 years, just to get help. And I've had story after story about that.
Extremely impersonal.
And some of the
information they want and all this sort of stuff is extremely personal, but it's just terrible to deal with.
Well, some of the guys that have already got a pre-approved support, and they tell me, you've got to go to the doctor and fill out 100 pages. 100 pages.
Yeah.
So I kind of, I'm a Johnny come lately, but I kind of feel like, and this is what some of the people I've spoken to actually honestly believe, that we've got a federal system that more money gets spent to stop veterans and their families get welfare than if you just...
Well, it certainly seems that way sometimes, and it is, sending people away, particularly in recent times, in endless cycles of deployment, which has happened a lot. When there's, something goes wrong with the bushfires, we've actually called out the reserves now, and COVID assist, all these things happen. So there's a huge reliance on calling in the ADF to fix all these problems. And yet when it comes to actually helping them in return for doing their duty as they promised to do it, it's just a major uphill battle for them, and it's a real shame. It's actually disgraceful, I think.
As I said, I'm a Johnny come lately, but something, I reckon that the system would probably save money if the first instance they just believe the veteran or their family member. And do we really care? Like, I know there's welfare systems in different areas where it comes to maybe work cover or TAC or things like that. that are really onerous. But getting back to veterans and their families, do we really care if a very tiny majority aren't being completely upfront in the first instance? What about we care about the 99.9% that are reaching out for support?
Well, certainly the evidence is mounting, isn't there, that there's more support needed. We've got this dreadful situation with the amount of suicides that are occurring at the moment, and it's at least anecdotally, it looks like it's getting a lot worse. And of course, with the events around the Brereton report, that's people are very concerned about how that might play out in that area too. So it's quite concerning. There's no other time that we should be doing better. It's now, and particularly when we've had so many people deploy so often, and in such an incredibly stressful way. It will impact them for the rest of their lives. There is no doubt that cycle of deployment for those people. It's not like they've gone in sitting in an air-conditioned office somewhere for 6 months overseas or anything like that. They've actually been doing some hard yards and they need help.
Absolutely. And so why don't we just give it to them? I mean, let's not stay like.
Well, it's easy to agree, isn't it?
Well, the thing is, and I'm not I'm not like reflecting on people that work in the system. They've got a job to do. They've got to equate 3 different acts that
I feel sorry for them. They comp it too, but it's not. They didn't design the system. They're just working in it.
Yeah, it's not. They must be really it's probably not good for their mental health.
I don't think it would be good for them actually.
No. Yeah. And so, so what I've sort of getting back to, and I'm gonna Shane Newman, who's the shadow spokesperson for vets federally. Had a few conversations with him, and I'm going to have a conversation with him. And if we could get to a point where, in the next federal election, both major parties are committed to turning the whole system upside down, having a system where actually the starting point. I know it sounds easy, but I reckon it probably would save money. The starting point is you actually believe you believe the vet or their family, they need assistance. And as you know better than me, Mark, like the level of assistance might be just help moving house, or it might be a long-term assistance, So the level of assistance, it kind of varies. But, and the more I speak to people, I think part of the problem is, Mark, is the general populace do not understand that some veterans and their families. I know there is some vets I spoke to that said that they don't think the system's that bad, and that's fine. But some veterans and their families are treated in this way. I mean, and I just think that I reckon the veteran communities had a huge win in stopping the bill, as far as that may stop the Royal Commission. And now that that's momentum, I just think, and get what I said, Mark, I'm open. My government is open to criticism the way, if we're not doing the best by veterans, we'll tell us.
Let's hope the criticism's been heard, but the signs are that it looks like that's not the case, that they're trying to still find a way to patch this legislation together and make some adjustments and win over people in the process over summer, supposedly. So it's a really interesting situation. One of the things I just want to make a sort of a side note. It's a bit of a dig, really. A lot of state, ministries. The Minister for Veterans has got about 3 or 4 other jobs in front of their title before they finally get to the Minister of Veterans at the end. How do you sustain your interest in this? What's sustaining your focus on these topics while you've got local government and your other duties?
Yeah, and I hope this doesn't sound corny, Mark, but I just think it's a huge privilege. I think it's a huge privilege to be an MP. I've been an MP for ages too, which is kind of a bit scary. But it's always been a huge, you meet good people that do good things, best part of your job.
Yeah.
And so the last 6 months has been an absolute privilege to me. I am determined to do something.
Mm.
I've always, whenever I've had a task, I think you should do something, and I kind of feel like, I reckon as far as MPs, and look, I'm putting the boots into the feds, but I'll continue to do that while I've got the chance. But, like, it's all right to turn up 2 times a year at ceremonies, take a selfie of yourself, look all sad, then the dishes are done for the year. They're not done. There's much more important things that I can do. Of course, I respect those dates. Of course I do. And of course I will respect those dates. Of course I'll respect the history. Of course I will respect the sacrifice. But I see it that I would rather make a change that has some sort of lasting benefit for veterans and their families, rather than taking selfies of myself.
And looking back to the past glories and all these sorts of things, which I think is sort of creating a sort of jingoistic kind of sentiment that I think veterans actually are really sick of. And they're sick of the little platitudes of thank you for your service and all that sort of stuff. And, it's gone all corny and it's not, is it real? What are we doing now?
Well, it's, and yeah, and I actually agree with you. I just think there's a reality out there. As I said, I don't think the general public understand. We've got, just going back to the skills, we've got these assets. They're sitting at home. They're sitting at home. And they've been their skills have been invested in, and they're sitting at home. And getting back to, we show respect. And of course we do. But like we could, I think showing respect would be, well, if someone needs support, then let's make sure they get it. Wouldn't that be a better way to show respect?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm probably going to get in trouble with this interview, Mark, but I'm quite enjoying it. So, anyway.
What can I say? I hope you don't. Look, I just want to come back onto one of the things. I mean, we've been running a few themes, obviously, in Australian Veteran News, and obviously being Victorian based and being locked in the state, we've sort of focused on probably a little bit too much on our friends at RSL Victoria and the other ex-service organisations. But I think it's important to sort of, I think this is a theme that I think is relevant to all states and all, government money that goes into ex-service organisations. And you mentioned the issue that they're trying to. There's sort of a lot of heavy lifting has been sort of allocated to them, and that may not always be right as well. And they've often volunteer organisations stretched beyond belief, and they've got some of them have got some funny, shady things that they do for large member organisations that require a little bit of a poke and a prod every now and then, and it may not necessarily be a state government thing to do, but certainly, I think the public has certainly got an interest in those things. But this year, you've given, the government's given 1.5 million to RSL for the Anzac appeal, about 650,000, I think, to the Victorian Veterans Council, and I think 50,000. I think may have gone to the likes of Legacy, which is a fantastic organisation, by the way. It's a really wonderful group of people there. I guess the question I've got for you then is why is it important with all the other initiatives that you've got going on, why is it important for you to support ex-service organisations in this way with financial support and that sort of thing?
Yeah, and I think that the reality. The RSL rely on their Anzac Day appeal, and of course COVID.
Yeah.
Really, so that's where we were more than happy to give some support because they just couldn't do what they usually do in their fundraising. We formed a great partnership with them with some funding. I think the partnership was with the RSL and Legacy around an initiative called VetCom, which is just a hotline to get for vets to get some, particularly during the isolation, but it's worked out. I think it needs to keep going because they're pretty inundated. And some great stories have come out of that, about people being, isolated for a long time and then coming out of isolation, not because of COVID, they're just isolating because they've come back from being a serviceman or woman and have struggled to transition in any way. So, and you know, and Legacy was a similar situation where, you know, their usual appeal, you know, they did a great job online. Their usual appeal was a problem. The Victorian Veterans Council, I'm keen to sort of tool them up a bit.
Yeah.
I think they're a group that can really show some leadership, and the funding we give them, they allocate themselves to a number of applications as some small funding. And when you look at what they allocated recently, you know, small legacy branches in the regions that are supporting widows in with bills and things like that, which I think is you know, like there's some really admirable things being done. And like we're really keen to support all, you know, ESAs. I think, you know, the reality is there's a couple of hundred ESAs, I think, in Victoria.
We did a survey about 2 years ago now, but there was about I'm working off the top of my head. No, there was a couple of thousand registered charities in Australia. I think it was cutting up to 3,000 or something like that, who indicated on their charitable status record, whatever it was, I can't remember what they call that now, that veterans and their families are one of the recipients. And so it's mushrooming, of course, because people get back and they find a project and they might start a little charity up to support that. And I guess my thoughts initially about that is I was a bit critical. I thought, oh, this is just crazy because there's no consolidation and whatnot. But some of these small ones are actually doing some really useful, handy little things in local areas. You know, like the guys out at Jeb Summers and his guy is one of the guys we've interviewed, and they're just, all I want to do is just roll out some mental health first aid in local areas to pubs and clubs. I mean, it's just a simple thing that they're doing. And they're off doing that. So, you know, little things like that I think are very, very valuable. As long as they don't sort of compete with each other too much, it's handy, you know.
Yeah, you know, I want to work, you know, and it's early days, and you know, I kind of, you know, MPs committing themselves, and it might not happen is always a problem. But I'm really keen to work towards that. You know, the VVC, I think, is a good group to lead it, but I think that there should be, you know, probably every 2 years a summit or something like that, where all these groups could come together, learn from each other, you know, treat it like a conference and a summit and a bit of a show and tell, because they're doing great work, but some are doing it hard. It might be easier if they kind of like can work together and, you know, and network.
And I think it'd be nice to put in a little bit of some knowledge in there, a bit of research and sort of, you know, because the institution, I mean, I'm fairly well connected with Swinburne, and I know that they're interested in trying to find out, well, where are the problems? We're here to solve problems. We're here to solve difficult problems, and researchers are really keen. And there's a growing pool of researchers across Australia who are interested in these topics and looking into it. And I think bringing that knowledge in and informing some of the some of the decisions and some of the programs and doing it smarter and not harder is part of the solution as well. And I think at Summit's a great idea because you can incorporate the various parties with it, including get that academic side of it into it as well. I think it'd be useful.
That'd be great. Like I said, these things probably take about 18 months to do it properly. Yeah. And then if it's every couple of years, then it's already established, and you kind of, you know, you go from there. Yeah. But I think that's a great idea to include elements like that. We're kind of, as I said, it's a kernel of an idea that I have to sell to my government and my treasurer. And
I hope they take it up, because I think it's a winner. It sounds like an excellent idea. And one of the things that we're missing out on is you know, it's serious and proper engagement, and we want engagement across the community, but also from the grassroots as well. And so to give veterans an opportunity to be heard is important, because a lot of people rely too much on the ex-service organisations, and they're not always talking to their members either. And that's one of the criticisms that's going around at the moment. So
I think, look, you know, sounded like I was mean to the Treasurer. He's a very good man, and he will be very interested in this. I've had a conversation with the Premier, and he is very interested in this. It's about us doing, you know, what the nuts and bolts and what it would look like. You know, to do the due diligence, like as a government should. So I just think it's a great idea, and I agree with you, Mark. There's some small ESAs that just, like, we don't know. Like, there's so many of them doing great work, I'll never get to meet them all, I'm sure. But yeah, and I think we've got a few good things to work on. As I said to you, I find it's a privilege. I kind of, from the start, I said I learnt more about my old man in the last few months than what he did in his time in World War II than I've ever learnt. And, you think, it kind of really rings home, there's a person, a man, a woman, it's a similar situation to a lot of men and women now. You've done your duty to the country. You come home. You're dealing with, you've got a young family. You're dealing with, work and all that, and then you still got to deal with it. What you actually, you've got to reconcile in your own mind what you actually went through.
Yeah, and as you probably would have seen in some of the interviews we've been running, they're young people. It's not.
Yeah.
I think this whole thing with a lot of people growing up have this idea of the veteran, this old guy. They're young people and they're young men and women, and when they're trying to find their little place in society, and there's so few of them, so they don't really. It's hard to fit in, because it's not like everybody's been off doing this sort of stuff. And
no. And I've had some conversations with some of the vets that how they felt when they've come home, and it's really interesting, and it's usually different too. So it's not, one size fits all. Of course, it's not.
It doesn't.
But I think I'll need to move on, Mark. But can I say one thing that?
Yeah.
I probably really want to I think this. And I think we both know it, but Victorians, Australians, they love vets. They love them. I don't think, these problems are from the general populace not caring. I just think the problems are from the general populace not knowing.
The systems and structures aren't in place to get it done, and I think that's true. And I think we just need to be smart about it, obviously, and we just haven't done that, or we've let things slide. We haven't had to deal with it for such a long time, and now we do. So, Shaun, recognising that you've been very generous with your time, and you give us an enormous amount of time this morning. But I'd like to just, I guess, as a close out, just ask you what your end of year message to Victorian veterans and their families, and perhaps add into that what your pitch might be to those veterans and families thinking about maybe coming to Victoria and settling here after their service, or even just coming for a change.
Yeah, I probably can't do much better than what I said before, Mark, that we want to be a state that acknowledges veterans' great attributes and great skills.
Yeah.
And we want to make sure we want them. And I think in fairness, we're probably not there yet. So this work we're doing with the Skills Roundtable, we will endeavour to get to a point where hopefully people leaving the services say, I want to go to Victoria because I know that my skills are going to be acknowledged and I'm not going to be employed and valued. So, and then, they might, if I start a race with the other states, then great. That's great. And I suppose I can't go better than to say, Victorian, across Australians, we everyone loves veterans, and they should, and their families, and and it's been like that for over 100 years. So I'm really keen to hear more stories from Victorians. I'm really keen to working with the veterans community as closely as I can. My ego can take it if anyone's ever grumpy with me over the state jurisdiction, if there's something that we can do better.
Yep.
Because I'm learning every day, and it's been a privilege working with the veterans community, veterans family, and I'm really looking forward to the next couple of years.
Well, Shaun Leane, Victorian Minister for Veterans, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Oh, this morning, actually. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks so much.